Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to be here. This is my first time ever to come to the Università Cattolica di Milano, and it is particularly touching to start this new experience in this beautiful room. I also see lots of young people, and I do like to pass the message. So I feel very moved and motivated at the same time. I graduated from University of Bologna in June 1979. So I can say I've been in business for the last 40 years, 2/3 of which have been spent abroad, and 1/3 has been spent in Italy. Abroad, I work in the USA, mainly Washington and Boston. I worked in Asia. I lived in Singapore, Hong Kong, KL, Kuala Lumpur, Shanghai, Beijing, and Bangkok. I worked in Latin America. I lived in Buenos Aires, Santiago, and Lima. I worked in Europe, UK, Germany, and Luxembourg. Right now, I spend my life shuttling in between Bangkok and Boston. That's keep going back and forth. At time I drop by Italy. Very glad Alessandro reached out to me, and it was worth delaying my departure to be here. I think for the last 23 years I lived in Asia. From 1979 to 1993, I mainly lived in the US and Europe, and spent most of my time teaching people how Americans do it. For the last 23 years, I spent my life in Asia telling people how Asians do it. I try to adapt. I think I have to devise a system to keep the thing on. Hold on, Bear with me. Okay. I'm probably the right person to talk to you about international business, because that's all I wanted to do since my very early years at the University of Bologna. I was never greedy for power. I never wanted to have a big army under me. I never wanted to be a CEO. I just wanted to learn the world. I even wrote a book that was a pretty decent success, and the title of it is Power is Boring. But to give you a little prompt, I can't just go through my life. That would be way too long. So I just start giving a prompt over my last 12 years to connect the last few years of my life with the kind of things you may be doing. Those are most significant because the world has changed a lot. Way back in 2005, I had it very clear that China would dominate the world. It was like I had it. I was in Asia. I lived through the South Asia crisis of 97, 98, when Thailand, Korea, Indonesia went belly up. Then I moved back to Washington, to the World Bank. Then I moved back to Asia again, and then the world has changed. It was no longer Southeast Asia, but the whole game was about China. Way back in the late 90s, going to China was like so desperate. I mean, you can only live in a hotel. You cannot get out of the hotels. The life was from a hotel to hotel. The hot spots are Jakarta, KL, Singapore, maybe Hong Kong, and so on. All of a sudden, after the Asia crisis, the thing just changed. And it became obvious to me that China was going to go somewhere. I remember vividly how in 2004, on a trip to China with President Ciampi, for the first time in my life, I had dinner in a restaurant that was outside the hotel. It was a Casanova restaurant in 2004. That was amazing. If some of you go to India or to Pakistan or so on, you can only eat in a hotel. You cannot just stroll in the street, eat anywhere. But that was, the fact that, people were going out in the street, people were opening restaurants in the street. That was the change. And I said to myself, yes, China's going to do it. The details of what I did are not that important. I mainly do investment. I'm a partner of a fund, a private equity fund called Mandarin Capital Fund. And I'm very glad that my colleagues, who are generally very, very busy, today took the time to come listening to me, even though they have nothing to learn from me and they're always very busy. That also, I'm very excited. It's probably the first time in more than 10 years I had my colleague listening to a speech, my Milan colleagues. Well, I moved to China, but I was a China dove. You know what a China dove is? The word is split in two. There are China doves and China hawks. China doves think that China is very beneficial to the world, that does a lot of good, that it does impress a lot of progress. China hawks are the ones who want to resist China. They want to contain China. Well, it took me a few years to turn from a very from a very sweet China dove into a very harsh China hawk. I was very much within the system. We were the very first international private equity fund to raise money from the Chinese government way back in 2006. But as we lived into the system, the more we lived, we were really into the system. As we lived into the system, we get not to like it at all. And it got worse, worse, and worse. And then I started being really concerned. Oh, for example, we made, together with a very large Chinese company, Goldman Sachs and Oni, we made the first ever largest Chinese investment in Europe back in 2008. There's a Harvard Business School case written on it, because that was a breakthrough. That was the beginning of the 250 billion that followed up in terms of Chinese outbound investment. But then I started being concerned because I could see that Chinese were converting their economic might in political power. We are very good at doing that. And that sort of didn't fit well with me. I really stick to principle of rule of law, freedom, democracy. I'm really attached to those values, even though democracy is not a very fashionable word today, but I do really care. And I quite wasn't very sure that Asian values are values I want my kids to grow in. And I'm pretty sure I really don't want my kids to work for a Chinese company. Then it became obvious to me that Chinese investment was excessive, and the world was going toward the huge problem of oversupply. Today, everybody's wondering why, in spite of all the quantitative easing, inflation doesn't go up. Because there's too much supply around. Chinese have been investing 50% of their GDP for more than 30 years, when the normal rule of thumb would be 25 to 30%. When you have the second, maybe the first largest economy in the world in PPP terms, investing 50% of GDP, you end up building an incredible excess supply. They're going to have a very depressing impact on prices. And now we have the incredible paradigm where we have, especially in Northern Europe and in the US, you had low employment and low inflation. That had nothing to do with the classical economic theory. Generally, low unemployment is connected to high inflation because it's hard to hire people, salary goes up, and inflation goes up. And now it doesn't work. We keep pumping money, but inflation doesn't go up. Then another thing I realized, that in China, we Westerners became a commodity. When I first went there, in 2005, when I first went to live there, I've been traveling to China back and forth since 1994. But at some point, I moved to Shanghai. And in 2005, I knew things the Chinese didn't know, and I didn't have the money, which they didn't. At least had the money in US dollars and euro, and they had the money in renminbi, and there was no offshore renminbi market. Well, 10 years later, those kids know more than I do and have way more money than I have. So there's no point for me to be in China anyway. So I moved to Bangkok, and I left my beloved Chinese colleagues in the office in Shanghai. So I moved towards Southeast Asia. Bangkok is a big hub. I don't want to spend time on why Bangkok and why not Singapore. I already had lived in Singapore for 4 years. Anyway. And then I look at this Asia models and all the distortion and all the inequality and those damn values I don't like. And then I start looking at everything that was wrong with the Middle East and the inequality in the States and inequality in Europe, anything. And then I got struck, and I felt that I got also very disillusioned by problems becoming global, and at the same time, problems are global, but governance is not global. We cannot tackle global problems with national governance, with such complicated global governance coordination mechanism. Global warming, how do we tackle global warming? How do we tackle non-proliferation? We don't seem to be able to tackle supranational problem, let alone national problem. At some point, I started thinking that the one big hope for the world would only lie in technology. If there was a hope that we could live longer, that we could replace fossil fuel, we could reduce pollution, we could read the brain, that we could actually improve productivity, we can have a better life, and tackle some of these problems, that solution would come from technology. So I jumped and I moved back from where I started. I basically started in Boston, so I moved back to Boston. And I started plunging myself into technology, try to infuse technology into our business model. Unfortunately, in the meantime, two major things happened which I totally misread, and I lost my face. I did miss Brexit out. I couldn't read Brexit, and I couldn't read Donald Trump. That was a big shock. That was big for me. I mean, I knew that things were there, things were brewing, and but I didn't expect them to hit so bad, which they did. All this growing of the populistic parties and this all retrenching to nationalistic ideas, the resurgence of national selfishness, that's something that quite didn't go along with me very much. I mean, I don't want to spend any time on Europe, right? In the US, I can talk more about the US. I really don't spend much time on Italian politics and not much on what's going on in the EU, and I'm sort of very disenchanted about it. But we can also say in the US, there's been a military takeover. Basically, there are three people who run the show. One is Mattis, Minister of Defense. The second is General Mattis, General Kelly, Chief of Staff, and General McMaster, National Security Advisor. Tillerson, Secretary of State, is absolutely irrelevant. His budget didn't get funded. And they let Trump tweet, but then the establishment is taking over and the country's track is going along. Wall Street, they have outsourced economic and policy to Wall Street. I mean, the Minister of Treasury, the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, and things are very much back to normal. None of the Trumponomics have happened yet, and they're very unlikely to happen. So I see a very blurred future. To the point where I'm not sure what I'm gonna be living in the future. Maybe Northern Europe is okay. Maybe NAFTA is okay. I mean, the whole combination of Canada, Mexico, and USA. I have deep concern about Southern Europe and this country in particular. As far as business, I'm still hot on Asia, however. Asia has embedded advantages that we don't have. They don't start with heavy public deficit. They don't start with having welfare systems. They have a lot of young people. So they are born and travel unencumbered. Unlike young European, young Italians, they grow up with a public debt, having to support 2, 3 people each. Those guys run very light, and they do run. These things are said. Well, I would like to go back on. I know you have you have just completed a Master in International Business, right? But does it make sense? Does it make sense to have a Master in International Business? I really don't think so. Sorry to disappoint you guys. I think you're way past the time. In the upcoming world, being over-specialized in a specific market, emerging or not, we become less and less useful. People will not hire you because you're international. People will not hire you because you know about Indonesia. People will not hire you because you know about Italy. Geographic or international predisposition is becoming a commodity. Lots of people come to me and say, I want to, I just have so many letters. Oh, dear Dr. Forchielli, I decided I'm going to devote all my life to Asia. Asians don't need you. Unless you have some special vertical skill, they're not going to need you. There's so many. They're top of the league in all the tests. They have fantastic business school. I mean, the GMAT test, they even have to have a premium GMAT to access the top US business school. I mean, there's no room for you. There are so many of them. They work twice as hard as you do. They are hungry. Most of them come up speaking English. They're not, and in Asia, there is more than half the world population, and it's the fastest growing reason. There ain't much reason to be there. When people call me and says, to do what? You think the Chinese are going to hire you? Why should they hire you? I receive so many letters from people who say, oh, my kid is studying Chinese hard. He's killing himself in Chinese. They just don't get it. Chinese, we learn English before we learn Chinese. It's a completely waste of time. Learning Chinese is a complete waste of time. It's good to go market shopping if you want to buy some carrots or some Persephone or something, but it ain't going to help you do business there. The only difference today is going to be between the people who know how to do their business and people who don't. No matter what the international dimension is going to be about. At the same time, the whole issue of having being cultural, having cross-cultural skills, and be able to negotiate because Chinese and Americans, the offer is gigantic. I think 20% of the US population is Asian American. And they're the best in school. The world is already cross-cultural. There are probably 1 million foreign students studying in the US, of which 400 to 500,000 are Chinese at any given day. What the heck are you going to stuck yourself in doing cross-cultural what? Is going. Marco Polo is no longer needed. The big, is all flat, is all number, is all trading set, is all platform, is all algorithm, is all programmable things. There is already universal language. This argument is crucial. I'm sorry to hit you hard now, but I prefer to be the one to hit you because you're gonna get hit by real life. Because this argument is crucial. Since these dynamics, we completely redesign job profiles in the market. Often people tend to conclude that this globalization, flattening of the world tsunami, will all affect the lower levels of the labor market, so low value-added jobs, blue collars, and the likes. However, their perception is misleading. As high value-added position, white-collar job and the likes are far from being safe. And this new geography of competences is going to have a tremendous impact on your future. The apparent flattening due to globalization will not simplify things. but will rather increase technological, business, and cultural complexity. As we said, we need to reconsider the whole concept of international business. And you better think of it now. There are key emerging trends. One is bridging gaps at global level, as having a footprint in the world's most relevant clusters of excellence in a simultaneous and connected way. If you want to be in the world today, you have to have a foot in Bangalore, you have to have a foot in Shenzhen, you've got to have a foot in Silicon Valley. You ain't going to compete otherwise. You can't just be unidimensional. If you want to be a multinational, you have to be in North America, in Europe, and in Asia. That's the same is true about many other things. Thinking a second paradigm, you've got to rethink the concept of global clusters, local cluster. Why are Italian industry districts facing crisis? The reason is they follow outdated business system strategies, and the sectorial views are dead. Instead, we are witnessing the emergence of a local ecosystem that integrate different high value added together. You need to have 3D printing. You have to integrate IE. You need to integrate, IE stands for artificial intelligence. You need to integrate machine vision. What we are doing today is not enough. In Italy in particular, we are good in hardware, we're nobody in software. And improving a product only by improving the mechanical part of it, you're lost. You can see in cars. How do you build a better car? More and more electronics. And more in the future, cars will become electric. And then the third part of this paradigm, you're going to go after local clusters, not countries. It doesn't make sense going to Italy. Italy where? Bari? Catanzaro? Or maybe the triangle Milan, Bologna, Padova. You know, it makes a difference. Milan, Bologna, Padova, Munich, that area. So you have to lose this definition, you know, measuring the world by countries. And this is, guys, just the beginning of your life story. Choosing international business is fairly relevant. It's made of little effort and a lot of fun. That worked well way back for me. 40 years ago, few people spoke English. The world was very close. I was an exception. I went to fairly renowned US business school. Then the war was at my knees. But now everybody today is taking an MBA or a master in something. You've got to do something more. And so the hard part for you is still has to come. You've got to choose a vertical. And whoever falls behind in math, science, or IT is going to be left behind forever. People are not going to hire because you know international business. People are going to hire because you know something about programming, something about digital marketing, something about artificial intelligence, something about cybersecurity, something about microbiome. But maybe at the beginning is okay, but you really want to work in international business, people are going to hire you because you're going to know something about something. You want to work in Asia? Well, then you've got to know things that they don't know. And having a master in international business ain't gonna be a difference, because those guys probably know the world better than you do. You've got to have a very strong vertical component to it. That unfortunately is not gonna last 40 years though. It's ever changing. Today, for example, you do 3 years of coding at the University of Bologna, you get hired by LinkedIn or Google. I know kids that did 3 years of engineering informatics in Bologna, and I go see them in Cupertino and Mountain View. They make $200,000 a year. They're 20 years old. I have another guy who's working for Google in Zurich, makes 300,000 euro. That's the whole IT component. The scientific community in Boston is all full of Italians, but they're very vertical. Whether it's IT, whether it's renewable, whether it's sustainable, whether it's mobility, whether it's biotech, whether it's microbiome, you've got to go vertical. At the same time, not get locked into it. So you have to maintain a little bit of your lateral thinking capacity, but at the same time go vertical. I didn't come here to be pleased or liked. I mean, fortunately. And I'm really sort of too old to fall for flattery or self-adulation. And I would much rather to be loathed for telling the truth than loved for lying to you. But if only one thing I said makes a mark in your brain, I win. And I like to be a winner. And that doesn't change the fact that I love you all, and I wish you all the best in your life. Thank you.